Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Lockdown featuring our guest, Aaron Korolnek, an executive producer at First Up at TSN and a journalism instructor, a sport journalism instructor at Centennial College.
This guy's been on my Twitter page right here. I love it.
I don't have Twitter. It's LinkedIn.
Oh, even better. LinkedIn, professional. All right, here we go.
How's it going, Aaron?
I'm doing great, fellas. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
We're doing
trying
good.
to stay busy in these times.
No doubt. Being a journalism student in this time, I mean, a lot of opportunities. I mean, you guys have clearly created something of your own. You should be commended for that. And I'm sure a lot of your fellow students are probably, just chilling on the couch watching Netflix all day. And you guys, look at you, you're interviewing no names like myself. So kudos to you.
No name until the show.
Exactly. I like that. This is my big break here.
Yeah.
So.
Well, basically, the first question I have for you is, obviously, you've been in the industry for a while, and you're a morning producer, so you've been getting up pretty early for a long time now. So, how has your life changed ever since the pandemic happened?
My life has changed a lot. Of course, I used to drive into our Agent Court studios at TSN 1050. Now I'm doing our show from home, which is good and bad. I mean, I miss having soup in the cafeteria with the guys after the show. That's right. We had soup every day at 10:15 a.m. or so. So quality soups at the TSN cafeteria. Can't wait to have some of that hearty vegetable soup once again. But now I just roll out of bed at like 5:30, 5:45 and turn on my computer and just go to work. So that's a benefit. The added sleep has really allowed me to kind of operate a little bit more functionally as far as not having to nap constantly throughout the day. But, it's also given me the opportunity to be on the air a lot more, too, which has been great for me, something I really enjoy and something I think I'm pretty good at. So getting those reps in is good because we're all in remote locations, so it's a little bit more difficult to conjure up conversations at times, and certainly the content is lacking more so than it used to. So the fact that we're all working remotely has been a little bit of a boon to my career because, I'm getting a lot more opportunity. It's something I relish, and I'm trying to take advantage of as much as I can.
What about the transition as like an instructor? You teach at Centennial College. How has that been, especially considering sport journalism is something it really works best, in my opinion, when it's hands-on? I think a lot of people would agree. So how has that been?
No doubt. Well, actually, Centennial College, they've actually pushed back the semester. So I teach this summer semester, which is usually April to August, something like that. And I believe everything has just been scrapped for that entire 3-month period, or 4-month period. So I think we're going back in September. That's the plan. And I really enjoy bringing in the guest speakers and trying to share any wisdom I might have to the students. And hopefully I look forward to doing that. I guess it's all at the discretion of the virus at this point. So let's hope we'll be able to get back to it as soon as possible.
So when I listen to First Up in the morning, it usually is like on a morning commute. When I was in high school, I used to listen to it on the way there. That's not really happening anymore. How have you seen your viewership change and kind of how people are interacting with your show differently now?
The viewership has absolutely changed. We are not getting the same type of listener interaction on our live programming, but just like in any business, we need to pivot and we need to understand the changing landscape of our business. And in doing so, we've really focused more on social media, disseminating our content that way. The online streams, encouraging our audience to listen on tsn1050.ca and certainly subscribing to our podcast. Those have all been huge avenues, and we're seeing a lot of a big uptick in subscribership to the podcast. Essentially, the live streaming numbers have increased. Generally speaking, in radio, traditionally anyways, something called Numeris, which tracks the listenership mostly by cars, just something called a PPM meter, which this company Numeris has installed in a number of cars throughout the city. It goes without saying that with so many fewer people on the road, that those numbers have decreased. I think it wouldn't be surprising to anyone, but you hope that the traditional revenue streams generated by those meters and that company who tracks them kind of shifts a little bit towards more untraditional ways like podcasting and streams. And I think that's something that we've seen a lot as far as TSN 1050 and my show as a whole goes.
And, in terms of your show, obviously you're the exec producer of First Up. How's it working with guys like Michael and Carlo every morning and just, seeing them, and they're kind of like I'd say, famous to a certain extent, you know?
Well, Carlo played 14 years in the NHL, 2 years in Germany. Michael was working at TSN before I was even born. So this man is a living legend in our business, and I love working with those guys on a daily basis. But as far as the content goes, we're all struggling at times to generate any type of ideas. We're basically constantly are always in communication as far as, hey, what if we did this type of power rankings tomorrow? Or what if we had this crazy idea about bringing a second hockey team to Toronto? What are the pros and cons? Could we debate that for an hour? Basically, in this particular instance, this is where the true professionals differentiate themselves, in my opinion. When times are lean and we're not able to debate if Mitch Marner should be playing with Austin Matthews or John Tavares, that's where our bread is buttered. I think it goes without saying that the sooner sports returns, the better. And I mean, we've already seen sports return slowly. Like UFC, of course, is their third event is tomorrow night, and NASCAR's back. I know the Bundesliga starts play tomorrow. So slowly we're getting back, but until the NHL, NBA, baseball, football return, it's a little bit of a struggle, but we make the most of it the best we can.
Kind of pivoting off of that, you talk about like how some leagues have come back, like the UFC, third event tomorrow, and so far it seemed to be successful in terms of keeping the athletes safe for the most part. And we've seen a couple other leagues slowly start to come back. Do you think this is kind of the first step for many leagues to return, or do you think it's still going to be a while before we see team sports at least coming back?
No, I think we're definitely going to see team sports back at some point. I just think the financial implications of not returning are too great to not at least attempt it. And you hear some of the proposals from the NHL having 4 hub cities, perhaps Toronto being one of them. In the NBA, they might have this Walt Disney World type bubble where no one's in or out. You get testing. And I think testing is going to be the biggest factor in this situation, because you look at our province here in Ontario, we're still not meeting the goal of the number of tests we do in a day. Like that, we're not even getting close to what the premier said even 2 or 3 weeks ago we hope to be at this point in time. So for professional sports leagues to be occupying tests that could go to the common man or woman, I think it's problematic for a number of reasons, but public health is paramount. And I think that the professional leagues will reflect that. But that being said, I think we're going to get to the point where testing is more easily accessible and not as prohibitive for sports leagues to get. And once we get to that point, I think it'll be a lot more palatable for these pro leagues to return. But again, I think UFC and the Bundesliga, NASCAR, golf returning on June 11th, those are the templates which the other leagues will work off, and they'll see what works, what doesn't work. And I think that'll be invaluable for them to make their decision as to how and when to return to play.
Yeah, so touching on that, Kasperi Kapanen shared a story on his Instagram that he flew back into Toronto.
We back.
Yeah, exactly. And Henrik Lundqvist was on the ice as well. So do you think that it's going to be a slow, like, how do you even think hockey's going to be back, or what's your personal opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think hockey's definitely going to be back. I think that you see in British Columbia, their premier, John Horgan, is petitioning directly to Gary Bettman to be a hub city. And here in Toronto particularly, Montreal is probably the worst in Canada, but in Toronto, the cases are still rather high relative to the rest of the province. So I personally don't love the idea at all of bringing the National Hockey League, having Toronto as one of the hub cities, because I'm a citizen of Toronto. I don't want any increased risk to me or my friends or my family. And I think it goes without saying that bringing hundreds of hockey players and their staff from around the world is a risk. But I also see the economic benefit, and I also see the benefit of getting hockey back. And as far as Kasperi Kapanen goes, he probably has been given some kind of heads up on, all right, come back to Toronto. At some point, we're going to get going here, skating in small groups. We know the Raptors are already allowing players individually into the OVO Center for practicing. I know Malcolm Miller was there with a couple of assistant coaches a couple of days ago. It's going to be a slow burn, but we know that leagues like the NHL and the NBA have given runaway until perhaps starting their next season as late as December. So there's a lot of time between now and July, now and August for these leagues to figure it out. And I think ultimately they will, simply because the finances are too big to overlook. And not only will that impact this season, but you're talking about seasons to come, because we don't know what it's going to look like next year. Will fans be allowed in next year? No one knows the landscape of our world today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, we're all kind of guessing. So I think you have to take a shot, and you do it with public health in mind, with the health of the players and the staff in mind, and just hope for the best.
And working in sports, you see on a day-to-day basis the impact that sports has on people, how invested people are in leagues and their favorite players. But, from this pandemic, we see it's probably one of the first things to go because, to a lot of people, it's a non-essential, it's kind of frivolous. I wonder, could you just talk to how important it is for sports to come back for just people's sanities, mental health, and just connection and community?
Well, I know personally, this is not professional sports, but the announcement yesterday from the premier that golf courses will be allowed to open tomorrow I haven't had that many texts from my buddies, just the excitement. Everyone's so pumped just to get out there, practice safe and responsible social distancing, but at the same time, you're getting out with the boys and you're seeing people you haven't seen in a long time. And I think it's going to be huge for people's physical and mental health. And I think the same thing goes, maybe not so much with the physical, but for the mental health, it's just resuming our normal way of living, waking up and knowing that you have that Leaf game to look forward to, that Raptor game to look forward to, especially with the playoffs, I think will be huge for people. And I think it goes hand in hand a lot of the times with spending, the economy. When people feel comfortable and feel normal, they'll be able to resume the way they used to live. And I think sports is a big part of that, more so on the mental side, but we know that it's important for our economy to get going. People need to be working. Businesses need to be generating revenue. And I think sports, even though it may not appear that way on the surface, will have at least a starting impact on getting that motor going the way it used to be.
And as a fan yourself, what do you think of just having, somewhat of a bastardized NHL playoffs or NBA playoffs? There's always going to be an asterisk beside that. I'm kind of tossing between that. I don't know how I feel about them trying to come back. I know it's a business decision, but I kind of want your take on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure you guys saw Shaquille O'Neal come out earlier this week saying that why even bother? Let's scrap the season. Health is too important. And the champion would ultimately be meant with an asterisk or labeled with an asterisk. And I completely disagreed with Shaq. Let's just stick it with the NBA. In 2012, LeBron James won the NBA championship in a 66-game season. In 1999, Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs won the championship in a 50-game season. There have been adverse situations in which leagues have, with lockouts in particular, have endured, and no one remembers that these were shortened, truncated, lockout-ridden seasons. And I think I can tell you in 10 years' time, when we're looking back at the year 2020, we're not going to be thinking about, the Oklahoma City Thunder won the NBA championship, but that doesn't count because, there was a 3-month stoppage in the middle. We're going to be thinking back to, remember when our entire lives were turned down upside down on a global scale. So I think it's a little short-sighted to say that there'll be an asterisk attached to it. I think you could also argue that it's even more impressive to win a championship considering all the circumstances surrounding it, with how difficult it'll be to train, how teams will be unfamiliar with their concepts, at least early on. And a lot of between the NBA and the NHL talking about starting without any regular season games, going right into the playoffs. These are very difficult situations for professional athletes to navigate. And I think you could even make the argument that those situations make it even more impressive to overcome and ultimately win the Stanley Cup or the Larry O.B., whatever it may be.
And kind of pivoting off of that in terms of say leagues were to start the playoffs immediately, how do you think they will kind of handle differences in terms of if some teams have played more games than other teams and stuff like that, are really close for the 8 seed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I know in the NHL they're talking about the 24-game format where Montreal would make it. And they were, I think, 15 points behind the Pittsburgh Penguins, who they could potentially play in the first round. And, I mean, Montreal's a team, the Canadiens, that sold off assets at the trade deadline because they were all right, well, we're not making the playoffs. Let's trade Ilya Kovalchuk for a third-round pick. Let's trade I don't remember exactly who else they moved at the deadline. But they were a team that had no aspirations of any playoff success. But now they've been granted the second lease on life, potentially, which will make it even more interesting. And I think the question I have with the idea of expanding the playoff formats, which will inevitably happen in the NBA and the NHL, is this something that becomes more permanent? You're looking at more teams in the playoff, more revenue, more playoff dates in the future for teams to host their fans in, and more games equals more money. We know that formula is as old as anything in professional sports. So you wonder how could be a trial balloon for pro leagues to have larger playoffs. And if that's the case, you could argue that kind of affects the integrity of the sport. I would totally understand that. But in this time in which we live, where finances will reign supreme, maybe this is something we could entertain for at least a year, 2, 5 years down the road and see how it goes and reevaluate as we go along.
I totally agree with that part. And, if it's going to ruin the sport, I don't know if you can necessarily say that, because if you're watching the Last Dance documentary right now, especially, you look at when MJ goes and play game 5s and 6s, and it's the other way around, where it's game 4 and 5s at the same location, then 6 and 7s at the same location. So we changed that. And then if you look at the World Cup, they're trying to do 48 teams. The European Championships did 24 teams with groups of 3, and they changed the formats, and it worked out well. So to your point, I think it will turn out to be a pretty good decision. Especially, everyone loves the playoffs, and the more teams you add, the better it is.
Well, the NFL added a team to the playoffs in both conferences. I know Major League Baseball was talking about expanding the playoff format for next season. So it's becoming uniform across sport, and I think that the professional leagues understand that playoffs is where your bread is buttered. Like, that's what the fans really tune in for when you have a chance to win a championship. And you wonder how that could affect the financial revenues going forward. I think it's going to be a major impact for them, because teams will be looking to save every penny and make every penny they possibly can. And expanding the playoff format, I think, is a big way they can do that.
So I wanted to ask you, from the perspective of a producer, we've seen now it's kind of been forced, but a lot of different roles in the industry have been forced to be done from a remote area, from home. Do you think this is just something that's going to happen because it has to happen right now? Or do you see it as something that could be more permanent once COVID-19 is said and done?
So it's a good question. I'm not really sure. I'm stick mostly to radio. I mean, I do a little bit of TV stuff with the CFL, but I know that on SportsCenter, for instance, if you work on The Row, which is kind of the group of people who put together the highlights and cut all the features, all the production value of a SportsCenter, which there's numerous over the course of a day when sports is going on normally. I don't really know how they're going to approach returning, because you think about the little pods in which everyone's working. Everyone's working side by side. It's like a factory line almost. So how social distancing and the lack of a vaccine and the concerns that executives and workers will have, I don't really know how that will be affected. But there's really no way around as far as producing live television. People need to be in control rooms. People need to be lined up with one another against one and each other on the row, because that's just how it's always been done. If there's another way to do it, I mean, a better way to do it, like you can keep people safe, I don't know of it. I don't know if TSN has the capacity to change the way that they produce television. I think they're going to try. And I'm sure that, like in every business, you think about Twitter, you think about Facebook, Google, Amazon, those companies have been very progressive in allowing their employees the opportunity to work from home as long as they feel comfortable. I know Twitter a couple of days ago announced employees never have to come into the office again if they don't want to. I don't think sports will be the same, simply because it's a very hands-on, interactive medium in which people really need to work closely with one another. But, I mean, it remains to be seen. I know, again, I do my show from my house. I know Michael Landsberg does his show from his house. Carlo does his show. And the guys from Overdrive are doing their show from their homes, and they're broadcast for 3 hours on live television. So, like in any business, we're adapting as best as we can. And I think ultimately this work from home economy will change the way business operates. I'm not so sure necessarily in sports media, but it will, at least to some extent. Maybe not so much as other businesses, though.
And I do think the smarter networks will just recognize that, having that person-to-person connection is so valuable to the creative process, and creating content and producing, right? There's nothing like just spitballing with people that you're beside. As an instructor and kind of putting on your instructor hat, what would you say to people, young people particularly, stepping into potentially a precarious, sport media industry?
Yeah, there's no doubt it is very precarious right now, probably more so than ever. But the entire workforce is enduring the same type of concerns, right? But I think there's absolutely an opportunity for you guys, for sports media students, for young people looking to get in the business, because think about this is what I'm hopeful happens. What's about to happen in the summer? You're talking about probably the greatest boom of sports in the history of sports, period. You're talking about the NHL playoffs, the NBA playoffs, the NFL in September. You're talking about MLS, maybe the CFL, all type of soccer leagues, baseball, all around the world, all together. Their most important times of the year, all operating simultaneously. Golf too. I mean, there's just so much sports content that we're going to be just bombarded with, and there's a massive opportunity for people to do things exactly like you guys are doing, and going above and beyond what you're asked from your instructors. And as far as to put my instructor hat on, the number one thing I continue to impress upon people, whether it's my students or guys like you, is to form connections with people who can actually impact your career in the future, and demonstrate that you're able to think creatively and come up with creative content, be ambitious, and try to reach out and form connections with those people, because you never know where down the line they will be able to make an impact in your career and be able to vouch for you. I know, like for myself, so many students, I've only been teaching, I shouldn't exaggerate too much. I've only taught 2 semesters of classes at Centennial College, actually a school I was at, which I think is important for the students, because I was in those same chairs, right? Like I remember sitting after having like 5 beers at lunch, where we're just sitting there, we're like, oh my God, is this over yet? But at the same time, I also remember understanding the importance of forming bonds with the teachers. I hope you guys are doing the same, because those are the people who you'll reach out to when you're in a little bit of a difficult situation, when you're looking for a job. Like, hey, can you point me in the direction of anything? And maybe they'll be like, oh wait, why don't I connect him with this guy or this girl who might be able to help him? And then it's a very, I'm sure you guys have heard the old adage, oh, it's just a small industry, everyone knows each other. And I didn't really believe that for a long time, but as I get older and more experienced and work with more people, it's so true. Everyone knows everybody, whether you work at TSN or CBC or Sportsnet. It's a very, very small industry where everyone knows each other. And I think social media has made it even smaller, because it seems that everyone's just retweeting each other's work, and you kind of get to know what people are about very quickly. So my number one piece of advice is to try to build relationships with people who have roles in which they can help you in the future. And I'm not saying I try to leech off people, but I think everyone's been in this place. If you have any role in sports media at all, you were starting out at some point as well. So I think the sports media industry is unique in that, where you're more likely to help a young person, an aspirational person, because I know for myself, I was in a journalism class like you guys are now, where I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. Like, can I work at TSN? What do I want to do there? Like, I like talking about sports, and I know all the fantasy sports, and I can tell you who the third reliever is in the Pittsburgh Pirates. Does that mean anything? So I have so many questions, but the only way you can really find out the answers is by getting out there and trying to meet people and forging relationships who can hopefully help you in the future.
I totally agree. Connections are key. Just getting you was through a connection, obviously. To
my boy Joe
like
Recupero, anything.
Joe Recupero, there you go. Yeah, but in other words, you touched upon social media before, and I wanted to ask, do you think social media is going to be so prominent the way it is right now when things go back to normal, or is it going to be heavily TV focused and radio as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking on TSN, I'm sure you guys know about Bar Down and the incredible work that team does. Dave Cricks is a guy who runs Bar Down, a great guy and a super creative thinker. He was the guy who was Cabby's producer for years at The Score. Some of the best content our country has ever produced as far as sports media goes, so ahead of his time. And the team that he put together, this is a massive moneymaker for TSN. And all of it, it's an incredible thing. And I always think about how remarkable it is, because the guys who have become like celebrities, guys like Jesse Pollock, Luca Celebre, and Julia and Corwin and the whole team, these guys are like legitimately like social media stars. And it's all because of creative thinking and putting yourself out there and taking chances. And I think that Bar Down is a prime example of what everyone should be looking to emulate: creative content, relatable content, and churning out good stuff consistently pays dividends hugely. And that's a prime example. And as far as social media, I think it's going to just continue to become more and more important in our lives. And, you think about TikTok is now a huge thing that didn't exist. How long? A year ago, no one had even heard of it. And now everyone's talking about TikTok. Twitter, the user base is increasing seemingly on a daily basis. Instagram is synonymous with our lives. I mean, I feel like I'm just like, anytime I have a spare second, I just pick up my phone and I'm like magnetically attached to my Instagram and the latest Instagram stories. I think it's just going to become more and more important in our lives, not less.
Yeah, Jesse's kind of TikTok famous, actually.
Really?
Blew up a bit here and there.
Send me some links.
Not really.
He got a couple 100,000 views.
Oh,
But,
wow. Well done.
yeah.
That's it, man. All it takes is once. Like, I have one of my favorite rappers, a guy named Russ. I don't know if you guys know him. He keeps living by this old adage where he's not like super big, but he's making a lot of money. He's getting a lot of clicks. And all he says, it just takes one. It just takes one big hit to become a mega star in our world. TikTok is another example. Like, think about like Steve Dangle on Sportsnet. He started his career making YouTube videos just talking about the Leafs, and now this guy's prominently featured on Hockey Night in Canada. It's all about creative thinking, building your own niche, building your own brand, and if you can do that and do that effectively, it really is the case where the sky is the limit.
Yeah, and for my final serious question, for you, obviously, athletes and that world is one thing. Corporations, they'll obviously have test kits and they'll send them everywhere. Until fans get in, obviously the sideline reporter job and actually sending people to stadiums and stuff will, obviously not be the same. So do you think that role is going to, be eliminated, or how do you think that's going to play out in the future?
I mean, it's a tough question to ask. I'm sure the broadcast partners are discussing this with the leagues on a daily basis. Would a broadcast team be quarantined with an entire league? That, I suppose, is an option. A number of times at TSN throughout the years, games have been called off monitors from the studio, from people's homes, and that's also an option. I think, listen, I'm hopeful that there's a vaccine for coronavirus and we're able to resume exactly how we were living 3 months ago in the not too distant future. There's some people who say that's realistic. There's some people who say it's not. Who knows? But at some point in time, we'll get back to where we were. And I think the sideline reporter gig is an important one. It adds color to the broadcast, and think of how many classic moments have happened in sports broadcasting simply by virtue of the sideline reporter asking a funny question or getting a funny answer. So at some point it'll be back, but it might not be for a couple of years. So the world changes, and I think that's a job that will change. I mean, I guess they could just wear like an N95 and do their thing at some point, but nothing's perfect at this point. But I guess the world's changing, and so will that role too.
Aaron, last question we want to ask you. It's a fun one. What is the first thing that you want to do, or that you're going to do once everything is back to normal? Is it golfing or?
Well, I'm playing golf tomorrow, so I want to hit the bars with the boys. That's what I want to do, more so than anything. Rolling into the bar and just having some drinks with friends would be just such a blessing at this point. It's something that I love doing. And certainly, like, the patio season is almost upon us here in Toronto, so I look forward to that too. And if and when we can get back to that, I can't wait, because in the summertime, there's nothing better than having a cold beer and a patio with your friends.
Absolutely nothing better than that. Aaron, we want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. A lot of insight there, and I think we had a lot of fun with this one, so thank you.
I'm glad to hear it, boys. Anytime, if you want to get Kolyakovo or Landsberg on, I'm sure I could help arrange that too.
Awesome.
All right,
That'd be awesome.
All right, guys, take care.
You too.